Will be down several degrees than what we saw yesterday, and it's going to feel less humid too. In Wales, there's a fair amount of cloud in the sky likely, but a few bright spells here and there. A scattering of light showers is also likely. Maybe one or two heavier showers across the Midlands. They'll be moving quite swiftly, though, with that brisk northwesterly breeze. It's going to feel fresher with temperatures around 19 Celsius. Yorkshire and North East England are going to see increasing amounts of showers, some quite heavy by the middle of the day. The odd rumble of thunder can't be ruled out, especially further to the north. Some more general rain, again heavy, perhaps quite thundery at times, will be pushing south through southern Scotland this lunchtime. There will be some brighter skies, though, that should follow on from the north. For most of Northern Ireland, it's a much drier prospect this lunchtime compared to yesterday. Still a few showers to dodge, and it's feeling quite cool with temperatures of just 16 Celsius in Belfast. So the chance of further showers for many parts of the UK for the rest of the afternoon should become drier into the evening. That's how the weather's shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Can we just start? It's 9:30. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date with the day's news. MPs warn the greatest staffing crisis in NHS history is creating a serious risk to patient safety. The Health and Social Care Committee says research shows the health service is short of 12,000 doctors and 50,000 nurses and midwives. It also warns the government has no decisive strategy to help. The final two candidates to become Prime Minister will face their first head-to-head televised debate tonight. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have been trading blows over immigration, China and tax cuts over the weekend. The Foreign Secretary and the former Chancellor are vowing to toughen controls on migration. Ferry passengers travelling to France are being advised to arrive at least 2 hours before their scheduled departure. Ferry operator DFDS says extra time is needed to complete all border control checks with queues of around an hour. It comes after the AA warned holidaymakers they could face ongoing travel delays at Dover and Folkestone. New research suggests older people are returning to work amid the cost of living crisis. It's a study by Rest Less, which offers advice to older people, and they found that economic activity among the over 50s is at its highest level since the COVID pandemic began. An extra 116,000 over 50s returned to work or started looking for work in the past year. A bird flu outbreak on one of the UK's most important habitats is being described as an unprecedented wildlife tragedy. The National Trust confirmed that over 3,000 seabirds have now died on the Farne Islands off the coast of Northumberland. Rangers believe the outbreak could potentially kill tens of thousands of seabirds. You're up to date. I'll have more for you at 10 o'clock.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Well, we're exploring all the campaigns for leadership today because things hotted up over the weekend. Not only were more policies announced, but things got a bit more personal too. Well, let's cross over to the Ready for Rishi campaign first. Earlier, Rishi backer Tory MP Kevin Hollinrake had this to say.
Rishi himself says, you know, he's the underdog in this race, but it's great to have the opportunity to set his stall out. In my view, he's by far the best candidate to be our next Prime Minister. He's got the intellect, he's got all the features we need from somebody who can beat Labour in the next election, which is crucial, of course. He is a genuine, authentic Brexiteer. That's the most important thing right now. I think we need somebody who understands Brexit, who campaigned for Brexit, and somebody who can make the most of it. Because I think there's a world of opportunity out there, but we need somebody who can really deliver on that opportunity. In my own experience in my constituency, and I'm a North Yorkshire Member of Parliament, neighbouring Rishi, I've known him for a long time since we both entered politics, national politics, but my membership in my polls is well ahead of Liz, so we'll see what happens on the big poll, which obviously the results of which are announced on September the 5th. But my members in my recent poll were supporting Rishi by a factor of 3 to 1 over Liz. But this is a national poll, of course, ultimately, and we've got to make sure that he gets across the line. But the most important thing is we need somebody who understands the economy, who's got a track record of delivery in the most important battle we've got right now, which is inflation, of course, and the cost of living. Rishi has proven himself time and time again over the last 2 years dealing with two huge crises in this country. First of all, the COVID crisis and now the cost of living crisis. I think he's got the intellect and the ideas and the ability to innovate and implement, which is absolutely critical in all walks of life, but not least politics. He's the first cabinet minister I have known who knows my kids' names. They all love him. I've seen him in his constituency talking to people of all different backgrounds, different ilks. He's fantastic with people. He's just a really decent, honest, straightforward person, in my view. He's got real personal ability to connect with people personally, as well as to express his ideas and articulate them very clearly.
Kevin Hollinrake there. Well, over the weekend, we heard more from the Rishi campaign about his plan for migration. He's put forward what he describes as a 10-point plan to try and fix the broken asylum system, particularly in this country. Now, one person who's backing Rishi's 10-point plan this morning is the former Foreign Minister of Australia and former Australian High Commissioner to the UK, Alexander Downer. In February, the government picked Downer to lead a review into the UK's border force, and now he's backing Rishi Sunak. Thank you for joining us this morning, Alex. I suppose the first question is, why is Rishi your candidate to lead?
Well, look, ultimately this is going to be a matter for the Conservative Party members, but I think as a Chancellor of the Exchequer, he has shown huge intellectual calibre dealing with the COVID crisis, which you just can't underestimate. That was a simply massive problem. And of course, dealing with it has economic consequences, but not dealing with it would have had even more dire consequences. So I do think, economically speaking, he has a plan for carrying the economy forward in a responsible way. But the second thing is that on the issue that you introduced this piece with immigration, he does have a very simple and straightforward approach to this. There should be a limit to the number of refugees that the UK is able to take. People should be stopped from coming from France to the UK illegally, as they have been doing. And they've been doing so, by the way, at huge risk to their own lives. As we know, some of them have drowned on the way trying to get here, and supporting the continuation of the Rwanda third country processing option is, I think, very sensible as well. So, I think he has a series of pretty constructive sort of policies that he's put together.
It's interesting in this race, Rishi Sunak has been cast as sort of the continuity candidate, continuing the same economic policy that we've been seeing for the last couple of years, but also continuing issues like this Rwanda policy as well. You were picked yourself back in February to lead a review into the border force and how it is all operating. Does it concern you that Rishi Sunak may well just be business as usual as the next Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, you have to keep the same Prime Minister for business as usual to continue, and the existing Prime Minister is leaving, so you will not have business as usual. You'll have a different person at number 10, and a different person at number 10 will do things in a different way. So I think this argument that one of the candidates is a continuity candidate is not right. I don't think either of them are going to be continuity candidates. Both of them will have different priorities and different styles from Boris Johnson. There's no question of that. You don't want, however, the candidates to be promising to throw away the things that the government has done well. So in that one narrow sense, you want there to be some continuity in terms of their the sort of notion of global Britain, of reaching out to other parts of the world. The government has done a pretty good job. And both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss will continue, no doubt, to do that. But no, neither of them will be a continuity candidate. Both of them will make substantial changes.
Now, one other area of policy we've begun to hear a lot about over the weekend is, of course, how the UK responds to China and the growing dominance of China in economic and in security terms. Now, Liz Truss has, for the last couple of years, been perhaps more vocal on China as an issue. But Rishi Sunak, to his credit, has brought out a series of policies, not least banning these Confucius institutes across UK universities and trying to form a new international alliance on China. Australia, the country that you were former foreign minister of, has had a very complicated relationship with China in the last few decades. From your perspective, what do you make of Rishi Sunak's plan to deal with the Chinese threat?
Well, what he's done is, over the weekend, is he's recognised that China is the single greatest threat in the medium term to the UK. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And of course, we're very concerned about Russia and the war in Europe. But in the medium term, China is going to be a much more of a threat. It's proved itself to be very aggressive. Aggressive on Hong Kong, aggressive towards the Uyghur people in the South China Sea, aggressive in terms of cyber attacks and attempts to penetrate the key institutions of the UK as well as other countries, not least my own country of Australia. So it makes sense for the British government to recognise that threat that the Australian government and the American governments have both done. And Rishi Sunak has come up over the weekend with some constructive proposals, I think the most important of which is to protect critical national infrastructure. But secondly, the banning of the Confucius institutes in the 30 UK universities that have them is a recognition of the need that the universities need to be independent, not subject to funding from Beijing and diktats from Beijing, and that's the problem with the Confucius institutes.
Does it concern you that Rishi Sunak hasn't spoken much about the issue of China over the last few years? Indeed, there was some reporting that he was on the side of those who wanted Huawei to come in and be part of our critical infrastructure when it comes to communications in this country. Well, is this a U-turn from Rishi Sunak?
I don't think it is, actually. I think there has been a gradual evolution, as has been the case in Australia and in America, of British government policy towards China as we found out more of what China has been doing. I mean, Australia has been deeply engaged with China, but it's in recent times that China has, if you like, turned hostile and become very aggressive. And that has led to a substantial change in Australian policy, and the same here in the UK. But of course, Rishi Sunak has been the Chancellor of the Exchequer, not the Foreign Secretary or the Defence Secretary, and the carriage of those issues has naturally enough been with the ministers who have direct responsibility for them. But I think it's interesting that Rishi Sunak should choose to make a public statement on his approach to China as Prime Minister, should he become the Prime Minister. That does show what I've said all along about Rishi Sunak, that the man has intellectual breadth and understanding of a whole range of issues which you need to be the Prime Minister. I mean, you need lots of things to be the Prime Minister, but if you're not intellectually equipped to do it and you're not intellectually adept and flexible, then you're not going to be able to do the job well. And he has shown that, not to reflect on Liz Truss, but he has shown that he has those capacities.
Well, really interesting stuff there. Alexander Downer, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. Your perspective has been absolutely fascinating on these issues. So, there we've heard what the Rishi Sunak campaign has been thinking about these issues, particularly with regard to policy. And we have seen a great deal of policy pop up over the weekend. Might tonight's debate be less about personality and more about policy? Perhaps that might be wishful thinking. But let's return to that issue of migration. Of course, the number of people making the 21-mile crossing from France to Kent, to that Kent coast, rose from 8,420 in 2020 to, get this, 28,526 last year. I'm going to repeat those numbers for you. 8,420 in 2020, up to 28,526, a rise by more than 20,000 people. That's incredible. So what's the answer to the UK's immigration crisis? Let's explore what the Rishi campaign has proposed, and indeed what the Liz Truss campaign has proposed here now by an expert, I should say, Steve Valdez-Simmons of Amnesty UK. He directs their refugee and migrant rights programme. Thank you so much for making the time for us this morning. I suppose the first question is, looking at this 10-point plan that Rishi Sunak has put forward, some of the points are relatively vague, some of them are more specific. What's your overall takeaway from his proposals?
The overall takeaway is that he is embarking upon precisely the same sort of programme as the Home Secretary has been pursuing for the last 3 years. That is one of seeking to avoid asylum responsibilities, seeking to suggest that these should be other people's responsibilities and not this country's, and trying to therefore prevent people arriving, continuing the idea of not processing the claims of people who do arrive, and imagining that somehow or other, the still relatively few people who come to this country to seek asylum can be made and sent somewhere else for someone else to take responsibility. It is a hopeless, hopeless way of responding to this, and it has collapsed our asylum system, because the one statistic that perhaps more than any other that needs to be more talked about is that when the Home Secretary became the Home Secretary 3 years ago, we had a backlog in our asylum system of around 15 to 20,000 cases waiting more than 6 months. That figure has risen to the last count of well over 75,000. It is probably very much higher now. And it has gone up every time there has been a count. That is because we are not dealing with our asylum system. We are just letting it fall apart.
Mean that we haven't funded our asylum system enough, that we don't employ enough people to do the processing? Why does this backlog continue to grow? Or surely, if we're to follow, for example, what Rishi Sunak suggests of perhaps a cap on the number that the UK takes in each year, wouldn't that help get through that backlog?
I'm afraid ideas of caps are for the birds. The problem has not been the number of people who've arrived, because over most of that period, there has been no increase in people arriving. There have been more people coming by boats and fewer people coming by other means. And in fact, the boats ought to be easier to deal with because they're visible. You know the people are coming. You can see them from the shore. You can make preparations for this. So why you cannot manage the people who arrive by boats any better than the people who used to arrive in greater number in the backs of lorries, for example, I do not know. And the reason the system has collapsed has not been particularly lack of funding. It's not been particularly lack of staffing, although now there were great need for those things. It's simply because we stopped processing claims. We started to believe, or our Home Secretary did, that we could simply refuse to process the claims, pretend somehow that this would mean people would go away or not come, or some other country would volunteer to take responsibility. So our backlog just grew. And of course, while people are here not having their claims decided, they still have to be managed and supported. So it's still very costly, and you're nowhere near the time of either deciding they can leave the system because they're entitled to be here and get on with their lives, or that they don't have an entitlement to be here and efforts can be taken to try and return them to the places they've come from. So it's just a huge waste of capacity, effort, and at great human cost, of course, for the people who are left in limbo in the meantime, wondering what on earth is going to happen to them.
Suggesting that perhaps there is no solution here. You mentioned how the numbers coming in the back of lorries has considerably gone down while the numbers coming across in small boats has risen. It seems like a bit of a horrific game of whack-a-mole where one avenue is tightened and then another one is opened and explored, and that perhaps government can't control this issue. Is therefore the only answer here a rather dispiriting one, that the government simply can't control it?
Well, there are ways in which governments, and I emphasise the plurality of that, could better manage and control all of this, but they would have to work together. And a critical part of that would be having to accept that they all have to take their share of responsibility. And that's a problem with the UK, because we still receive very few people.
The United Kingdom government would say that it has opened a huge avenue from people from Hong Kong, for example. It's opened a large avenue for people from Afghanistan, from Ukraine. But I suppose that there is the argument that there are lots of countries in the world where there isn't an avenue to. And I suppose there is a balance here. It does seem that there can't be...
Can I just correct one thing? The issue of Hong Kong is entirely separate. People coming from Hong Kong, nothing. I mean, it's a great scheme for people from Hong Kong. Every single person who has a visa right from Hong Kong is a British national. The basis upon which they can come is having British nationality and having sufficient funds to support themselves. It's nothing to do with fleeing persecution. So we should not compare that to the issue of asylum. You talked about Ukraine and Afghanistan. You're quite right.
And Syria as well.
Refugees. And Syria beforehand. The Afghan and Syrian programs, very important, large by our historical standards, but small in terms of the numbers of people provided protection overall. Our asylum system has long dealt with and provided safety to many, many more people. The Ukrainian scheme is different. It's taken a long time to get going, but it is dealing with significantly larger numbers of people than this country has been used to. But still, if you look at any comparator in Europe or those that provide asylum elsewhere around the world in serious number, we lag proportionately far behind. Now, we need to change that mentality if we want to live in a world where smugglers don't control everything because no one wants to receive people, so there are no legitimate routes that people can take, but instead we have a managed system where people can make an authorised journey to a place that is safe and all countries play their part.
Yes. It does strike me that it is odd that we have these organised routes for specific countries, but we don't have a general organised route, perhaps an offshore processed route, as we do with Ukraine. We have a centre in France that does process people who come from Ukraine to France that then can come legally to the United Kingdom. Perhaps it would be a rationalisation of the system to expand that centre. I'm afraid we've run to the end of the conversation here, but thank you so much, Steve Valdez-Simmons of Amnesty UK, for joining us. It's been a really interesting conversation there. Really appreciate your time. Now, earlier this morning, Education Secretary James Cleverly, vocal backer of Liz Truss, of course, appeared on Breakfast, and Eamon Holmes began by asking him his thoughts on tonight's head-to-head televised debate.
Well, I do think it's right that we test the future Prime Minister of this country. Now, one of the reasons I'm supporting Liz is because I've seen how she's worked as Foreign Secretary. I've seen how she's conducted herself on the world stage. I've seen how she's taken long-standing, consistent positions on China, for example, on making the most of the fact we've left the European Union. But a lot of people won't have seen all that detail, so I think it's right that they see them both, and I think it's right that they're tested. They're tested on whether their ideas are deliverable and also whether those ideas are long-held ideas. And I think that's an important point of it. I do hope that it doesn't end up with them being forced by the broadcasters to take chunks out of each other. I don't think that's a particularly great idea, but I do think it's important that people see the future leader of this country. I really hope that the candidates are given the opportunity to say what they believe, to answer the questions fully. I think that Liz has got an outstanding track record over many, many years on some of the issues that are facing the country today, and I really hope she has the opportunity to explain those fully. But as I say, the people hosting these debates have a big influence on the tone of the exchanges, and I hope that the debate is structured in a way that both candidates are able to speak openly and freely rather than being goaded into some kind of gladiatorial political tussle. But what's really struck me is, as I say, working with her in the Foreign Office, seeing how she's dealt with the incredible difficult situations that we are faced with internationally. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China's economic leverage in the developing world, and a whole load of other issues too numerous to mention. But on top of that, of course, I've seen the more private, personal side of her. The fact that she is incredibly clever, but also she can be very, very light-hearted and fun to be with. And I really hope that through this process, people will get to see not only the tough side of her that's been dealing with these international crises that we find ourselves in the midst of, but also that human side, the side that I see. And I think that combination is exactly what we need as a future Prime Minister.
Well, James Cleverly there, the Secretary of State for Education. And of course, that debate is at 9 p.m. this evening. It'll be a really interesting one. The first head-to-head debate of these two candidates for Prime Minister. Well, that's it for the briefing this morning. Thank you for being with me. Coming up next, it's To The Point with both Alex Phillips and Mercy Maroki. But first, here's the weather.
Tonight on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and it's a cooler and fresher day than yesterday with some sunny spells and scattered showers. Let's take a look at the details. So a mixture of sunny spells, an area of clouds and a few light showers across southwest England at lunchtime. Feeling fresher than Sunday though, with a brisk northwesterly breeze. The odd shower for southeast England too, and it's still going to be quite warm, but temperatures will be down several degrees than what we saw yesterday, and it's going to feel less humid too. In Wales, there's a fair amount of cloud in the sky likely, but a few bright spells here and there. A scattering of light showers is also likely. Maybe one or two heavier showers across the Midlands. They'll be moving quite swiftly though with that brisk northwesterly breeze. It's going to feel fresher with temperatures around 19 Celsius. Yorkshire and North East England are going to see increasing amounts of showers, some quite heavy by the middle of the day. The odd rumble of thunder can't be